Hello friends, Mr. Alper with our part 2 of our look at the basic elements of language, the parts that make language work. So we're going to go over a bunch of kind of technical terms here, not all of which are that important for you to know, to build on, but wanted to give you explain to you what all the building blocks of language are, at least in a sort of simplified, shortened form. So we're going to look at a couple of basic language terms. I'll tell you which ones are actually useful and important to know going forward and which ones are just part of the background. The first one, for example, is one that I'm going to use the term to describe some of the next steps, but it's not that important for you to memorize it. You'll probably never encounter this outside of this class, but I think it's a useful concept. The term morpheme. Morph comes from the Greek word meaning body, and it's the smallest, you could say the smallest body part of language. It's the smallest unit of a word that actually communicates meaning. So it's bigger than a letter if you spell words out. And usually it's bigger than a sound, although sometimes a single letter or a single sound can form a word. So a morpheme is the smallest unit of meaning in a language. So it could be a word, a single word, like eat, or it could be part of a word, like the word meaning, which has two parts to it. We'll explain that in a bit. Here's an example with the word speak. The word speak itself is a single morpheme. It's one syllable, say it in one beat, the word speak, and it doesn't have any parts attached to it. So it's a single word that's also a single morpheme. The word unspeakable, you can see the word speak in it. That's one of the morphemes, but it has two other morphemes attached at the beginning and the end. The prefix un at the beginning, which means not, and the suffix, the ending, able, which means capable of. So if something is speakable, you'd use that to describe a word that can be spoken. If it's unspeakable, it means it can't be spoken, or more often, it means something that should not be spoken. So an unspeakable crime, for example, is one that's so horrible that people are unwilling to even talk about it. So unspeakable has three separate parts to it, only one of which is a standalone word. The other parts are additions to it. But they all communicate added meaning. The word phoneme is sort of like an alternate way of looking at language. If you can divide language into its meaning, morphemes, but you can also divide it into its sounds. Most languages are spoken, although there are some sign languages, for example, which are considered full expressive languages that don't use sound. But originally, most languages that we know of emerged as sound. They were emerged in spoken form long before they were written. And so they communicate their meaning through sound. So you can divide a word or any spoken sound, any spoken language element into sounds. So it's the smallest unit of sound. And it can be indicated in writing with either very often a single letter, like the letter A, which indicates the A sound or the A sound, or the letter S. Although, because we only have 26 letters in the English alphabet, but there are a lot more than 26 sounds that we use in our language, sometimes you create a sound by combining letters. And sometimes the pronunciation of a sound varies with different letters depending on how the whole word is spelled. The expression root word, for example, in the word root, there are three phonemes. The R sound, oo, the vowel sound in the middle, and t, the T sound at the end. That's three phonemes. It only has one morpheme, the word root. Root word refers to the main part of a word if it's combined with other parts, like prefixes and suffixes. And we'll go over in a minute what those refer to specifically. Most of you probably know, but just in case, we'll go over it. So the main part of the word, in the word unspeakable, for example, speak is the root word in that. We can modify words by adding parts to them. And to modify, in general, the word modify means simply to change in some way. But when we talk about grammar, to modify means to describe something by putting an adjective or an adverb, words in front of it that help describe it more. Like if I said the red car, red is modifying the word car, telling us more specifically which car. Or it can mean to adjust the meaning of a word very often by attaching other parts to it, like prefixes and suffixes. So to modify in grammar means to adjust the meaning of a word. Prefixes are one of the ways in which we adjust the meaning of the root word by attaching some element, some morpheme, something that communicates meaning but is not a complete word, to the front, to the beginning of the root word. Pre is a prefix that means before. Fix, by the way, means originally to attach. So it's a little interesting to note that pre in the word prefix is prefix, if that blows your mind. Suffixes are those attachments that go at the end of a word. The word suffix is not a suffix, by the way. So it's an element that we attach at the end of a root word that modifies its meaning, like the ing ending to indicate ongoing, that something's moving or happening, or the ed ending that we put at the end of most verbs to indicate past tense. We can also combine two distinct words, complete words, rather than that are morphemes that stand alone. We can combine them into what are called compound words, words that are made up of two or more words that are functioning as a single unit of meaning. There are three kinds. It's not that important for you to know them, but to recognize that all three of these are versions of words. The word ice cream, for example, is considered a word because just the word ice by itself or the word cream by itself doesn't really add up together to what it means when you combine them like that. But we don't merge them together into a single word. We look at them as two words, but their meaning is basically a single concept. You might hyphenate them. Words like self-assured, it's a really common practice to put a hyphen between two words that are regularly used together, so they're understood as a single word, but they're still separate, but to emphasize that they are being used together. So a word like self-assured or self-confident usually has a hyphen connecting them. Very often what happens is words that start out being spelled with a hyphen between them end up merging together, they drop the hyphen and just become what's called a closed compound, where you have two words jammed together with no connection indicated, but you see them both there. The word firefighter example. Again, fire and fighter taken separately don't really add up to the expression that's conveyed by the word firefighter as one word. So there you see an illustration of all three of those compound words. I can sum it up in one picture, so it's one word. A phrase is any group of words that are working together, but that don't add up to a complete sentence. We'll talk a bit about what a sentence is. Now, that would include compound words because they do exist as individual words. Word like high school is the word high and the word school with a space between them, so they're still standing as two separate words. But again, if you put them together into a phrase, they communicate a concept that's different from simply the word high by itself or the word school by itself. But they can also include other words combined together into a unit of meaning that still doesn't communicate a whole idea like a sentence does. The phrase, a very old house. Well, that's not communicating a thought about the house, but it is describing one thing, a house, which is old. How old? Very old. So all those words are kind of linked together by meaning. So that's a noun phrase because it's a group of words that are basically can boil down to the word house. Or prepositional phrases. We're going to talk much later about what prepositions are, but the phrase with a song in my heart is actually a descriptive phrase that can't be boiled down to a single word, but it doesn't stand alone as a sentence. And participial phrases, which also later we may get to talking about what a participle is, but an expression like running a fever sounds almost like it's a complete thought, a complete sentence, except it doesn't say who's running a fever. So it's a group of words functioning together but not expressing a complete thought. Groups of words that express a complete thought are either clauses or sentences. We usually think of a sentence as a group of words that expresses a complete thought. Grammatically, though, there are elements that must go into a sentence to be a complete sentence. It must have a subject, that is, there must be a part of the sentence or group of words that indicates either what it's about or what is doing the action, who or what is performing the action that the sentence describes. That person or object performing the action is known as the agent. So every sentence, to be a complete sentence, must have a subject. I also am using the word clause here. A clause is basically like a sentence. We'll get to that in a bit, what the difference is between a sentence and a clause. Every sentence must also, to be a complete sentence, must have a predicate, part of the sentence that tells us what is the subject doing, or what is the subject. It might just be a state rather than an action. So that's where the verb in the sentence comes. We'll look at examples of that in a bit. So a sentence is a group of words that has a subject and a predicate, and it's complete by itself. We put in modern written English, we put a period at the end of it to show we've gotten to the end of the sentence. So it has somebody or something doing something and a verb that expresses what they're doing. Then there can be all sorts of other parts attached to it that expand on that. But if it has a subject and a verb, it's basically a sentence, unless it's a sentence that's part of the longer sentence. If you combine two sentences together using the word and, for example, each of those sentences is not separate unto itself, so we call it a clause. A clause is basically a sentence that's part of a larger sentence. It's combined with other clauses to create a longer, more complex sentence. So a clause is a group of words with a subject and a predicate that's part of a complete sentence, but not the entire sentence. So that's it for the very basic elements of English. We're going to look at the various parts of speech that combine into subjects and predicates and modify them in later lessons, but the basic elements are those. So thank you for watching and learning, and as a reward for watching and hopefully learning, here's a picture of my dogs. That's Duncan, Bianca, Laika, and Cyrus.